Did Jesus treat all the disciples with equality? Or let me rephrase that. Did he treat them all equally? Did he treat them with equality? Yes. Did he treat them equally? No. Does that make sense? Expand that. What do I mean by that?
Kind of more harsh on Peter.
He was pretty harsh on Peter.
But that's because Peter's personality was to jump the gun.
But the point is, there was a reason to treat him differently. Right.
You have to adapt to the personality of who you're working with.
Okay, who does?
The leader.
Ooh. I just want everyone to hear this, because this is a great point. Did you just hear what she said? It's not the follower's job to adapt to the leader, but the leader's job to adapt to the follower. Now, we'll get into some of that with followership, because I think there is a responsibility, but that is a key issue right there. All right? Go ahead.
I mean, do we push the issue of followers trying to adapt to the leadership position? Because I feel like that's kind of a...
We do have to deal with the fact that it is the responsibility of the follower to synergize with the leader, but there is a responsibility the other direction. The tendency is in modern, or at least in our culture, that followers' job is to merge for the leader. Right. And we want to get past that. So that's good. But again, it's an equality issue. We don't want people doing things equally, because if we do that, we do have a problem. Yeah.
Equally, you're kind of taking away their unique gifts and what they can bring to the table.
See, this is the issue with diversity. Now, so I'm going to rabbit trail for just a second, but it is an issue with diversity. This whole idea that we should treat all people equally is a great concept, but it's ruined the moment that you tear out the uniqueness of what diversity brings. Does that make sense? I mean, to treat all people equally, it ruins the value of what diversity gives us. And one of the things we know from organizational studies is the more diverse the group, the better solutions they come up with. But if we try to, in essence, circumcise, make impotent the role of diversity, we're robbing ourselves of the richness of what diversity can bring. That's my only big problem with this whole movement, especially in American culture, is to level out diversity. And I think we should celebrate diversity more. There should be a greater celebration of diversity, a greater recognition of diversity. Now, when we're talking about leadership, in the leadership component, what you're really dealing with is the fact that, go back to the Gospels, Peter was treated differently. Was there another group treated differently? The Pharisees. Who'd you say? The Pharisees. Yeah, Pharisees. Sadducees. As a separate group, now, you're going in a different direction, so let me go there. Did he treat all non-believers the same? No. He ripped the Pharisees and the Sadducees. But the whore, he treated with great compassion. Does that make any sense? Well, I'm glad it does to you, but we got to ask the question, does it? We are. And that's the key issue, is that you as leaders or good followers understand the key difference of what we're talking about. The hussy and the Pharisee were both sinners, both only had one way in which to rectify that, through the blood of Jesus. Equal playing field. The difference is the knowledge base, the personalities, the lifestyles, all these things come into play so that when I interact with you differently because of your unique needs. Go back to path goal theory. As we began this whole semester on this issue of path goal theory, my job as a leader is to remove the obstacles that are situational but also individual, so that the people who are following me can obtain the goal that they're seeking after. So I have to look at what is the unique nature of the person I'm working with, and I may have to treat them differently. Even among the disciples themselves, we know Peter was treated differently, but also there was three. Wasn't it three went on the Mount of Transfiguration? Why did the other ones not get to go? That's an important question when you begin to look at the leadership style of Christ. Did he recognize unique values in those people, in Peter, James, and John, that by doing this, that would help them in something later on? You know? Who do we see emerging as leaders after Jesus has left? Peter, James, John. So they were treated differently. You know, this is a big issue. I don't know if any of you going into youth ministry, but when I was in youth ministry, I got pounded upon this issue because there was a group of kids. I would meet with my kids. Then there was a group of kids that I said, I want you guys to come over and we're just going to hang out and do separate things. And that was intentional because I saw in them certain qualities that needed to be crafted and molded so that they could move through their process. This group was kind of over here and this group was over there. But parents got so upset because you're not treating them all equally. Well, if I try to help this person jump from here to here, I'm going to make them run into a wall. They'll be frustrated and they're just going to keep failing over and over again. I can help this group get from here to here. I can help this group get from here to here. But to put them all together and expect all of them to do that, it's idiotic. But now look at our education system. Look at our church. And we do the same thing. All people in church all come on Sunday morning, and we expect somehow that out of that will emerge like popcorn, a couple of kernels. But we don't get to address them because we have to be sensitive to the needs of these people. Does that make sense? Even in a class like this. I mean, there's some of you that just academically are just at a different level than other people, or in your own maturation process are at a different level. It has nothing to do with age. I know some great freshmen that are much maturer than seniors that I know in their life understanding and the way they approach things and so on. So I just want to be careful when we talk about equality. I think it is a semantic issue. And be careful about that. You need to recognize that all people are equal in the sense of opportunity, in the sense of the way of what's presented to them, of how it's presented to them. That should be equal. But not all people would be treated equally at the moment. Yeah.
What about like Job?
That he got blasted?
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't very equal, was it?
No.
Yeah.
No, but the Lord knew that he could trust him.
But see, there's an issue. That's a leadership issue. It's really the task of the leader to know what the unique nature is of the followers to facilitate the process of maturity.
Well, you could also say, what a beautiful painting.
Okay, I want to get it through your head that's because you guys are reading about leaders. What a leader does to reproduce leaders. It's just not the same. Actually, every time you get a formula, throw it away. Let's go back to practice and praxis. Once you think you know the solution, you better begin challenging it because it probably won't work the next time. Does that make sense?
We need to customize it to the
Oh, Lord. And to say that the formula works is to take away the unique nature that people change. So to say that this formula works, and this is true. I'm not being crass, but take this even to like marriage and relationships. It's not like and I forget who the author is, but in the Song of Solomon, he talks about relationships. This is actually a speaker about the Song of Solomon. And you figure out with your relationship with your wife. So for my wife, that, hey, my wife, if I do this, and I do this, and I do this, and I do this, hey, we're going to have sex. Or she's going to be happy. And so you try that the next day, pull the thing, and wait, none. What's going on? It's because people change. They're unique. They're alive. I like to think of it as organic. Does that make sense? What's that? Yes. Okay, so we got to think through that kind of stuff. All right? Does that make sense? We may revisit that, but anyway, the real point of today is to begin to get into the conversation of the followership side of leadership, because that becomes an important component in how we understand leadership. Now, some people argue with me, why would I waste my time talking about followership when I'm here for leadership? Let me be totally honest with you. I'm going to give you the punchline at the beginning, and that's because I believe that unless you master followership, you just can't be an effective leader. You can lead, but I think you can increase your effectiveness by wrapping your hands around this idea of followership. So I'll talk about this a little bit. Let me just share a little bit from my own personal perspective. That way it gives you an understanding of why is this such a hot issue for me. When you talk about what would I stay up talking about all night, and subjects and so on, books, and this is one of those issues for me. All right. And it really started out because my own life path, most of the jobs that I've had have always been in an assistant position for the most part. I was associate pastor for a number of years, a youth pastor, a pastor of worship arts, assistant coach in soccer for many years until becoming head coach. Even now, I'm a provost, a VP of academics. I was a national administrator, which actually worked under the director. So I was always, many times, always in that kind of that second tier level. Does that make sense? All right. So I operated always in this almost juxtaposition between having to be a leader because I had to lead, but also always having to report to someone, so I was always in a followership position at the same time. Which I was fine with. I mean, it's totally good. A number of years ago, though, I was fired from a position. And in getting fired from the position, I went to my area director and kind of said, I need some help. And their response to me pretty much was, well, you are not a director, and we really only care about taking care of the directors. Now, this was actually in a church setting, so it was actually, you're not a senior pastor. And really, our resources are for senior pastors. You're an associate pastor, so you are expendable. That triggered something in me, because I began to realize, gosh, we do this with a lot of people in this position. It started at the church level, where I began to realize that associate pastors were seen as not good enough, as making their way up the food chain, as expendable, as not worth the resources, as needing to be trained in order to obtain the higher position. Does that make sense? But then I began to see that that was true in the corporate world. It was true in organizations. It was true in volunteer organizations, nonprofits, and so on. That these people who were in this position, it wasn't so much that they were treated badly, but there was two things that were kind of taken for granted. One was this idea that you needed to move forward. So people would ask you, oh, what's your job? I'm an associate pastor. Oh, okay. When are you going to become senior pastor? So the assumption was that I wanted to become senior pastor, that my job was to become senior pastor, that actually to be an associate pastor, that's great, that's wonderful, thanks very much, but when are you really going to make it? When are you going to be a big boy? When are you going to grow up? It was true even as a youth pastor, same type of questions. And so in essence, what happened is you were valued less. You were not that you were valued less, but you were valued less. Does that make sense? Because you're just an associate. The same question happens even now. I'm the provost of this institution, vice president of academics. Introduce, hey, how are you doing? What is your job? I'm vice president of academics. Oh, when are you going to become president? I didn't know I was supposed to. Is that the expectation? See, in American culture, it is the expectation. And so, in essence, what we tell those people is, so sorry, can't wait till you actually grow up. Does that make sense? And that would make sense if, in fact, the outcome of every journey was always to reach this quote-unquote endpoint. But is that true? See, that's for me where this personal awakening came into play. And we're not even really to followership yet. This is more in the essence of people who are not primary leaders being treated as though because they are not the primary leader, they have less value and that they have to move on in order to be appreciated. Because the truth is, to get paid more, to get more respect, you actually have to get to the presidency, you have to get to the senior pastor, you have to get to the president or the management position. Otherwise, you're not paid, you're not valued, and people still will always look at you like, oh, so sorry you didn't make it. And that's so unfortunate. Mostly because, gosh darn it, some people are great at that level of leadership or that level of followership. That's where they excel. That's where they're good. Does that make sense? I mean, let's take it down to the lowest level. I mean, I'm a janitor. Well, if you're a good janitor, we should celebrate the fact that you're a great janitor, not devalue the janitor because they're a janitor. And, when are you going to get up the food chain? When are you going to grow up? Or when are you going to get better skills because you have to? You're not successful at that level. Yeah, go ahead.
It's like that story of Kennedy when he's walking to the space station and he
Yes.
meets the janitor and he's like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm sending someone to the moon. Like, he never thought.
He understood it.
Yeah, he understood it. And I think from what I had read, like, Kennedy was like, yeah, you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are.
But see, American culture just doesn't celebrate that. Another key moment, I'm just sharing some of my personal story. I was just in the car listening to talk radio and this commercial that comes on and basically, in essence, said, if you're not a leader, you're not worth anything. To really be worth something, you need to become a leader. It was for a leadership conference, to try to get you there. But that was the point. In our culture, unless you are the leader, you are not recognized as successful and you are not rewarded for the work that you do. And so, in essence, what it really does is it forces people who are not in primary leadership positions to have to go after primary positions, even if that's not where they're successful. Talk about treating people with equality. That's the negative side of that. That make sense? See, when you have someone who, let's take an associate pastor or a vice president of a company or a mid-level manager who's good at what they do, and you force them into a position that they're okay at, but they're not good at, suddenly you begin to pay them more and recognize them more, but in truth, they're actually worse for the job. The church, and sorry, Jason, I know the church is full of it. Meaning that senior pastors are called senior pastors merely because they've worked, gets me. They have worked long enough that they're just given a senior pastorate because that's what we do to old pastors. You're supposed to do that. Because you can't be a youth pastor forever. You can't be an associate pastor forever. You have to move up and move through the system. The problem is when they get there, I don't mean this badly, but when they get there, they're idiots. They're just not effective there. Same thing in management. See, if you've been around long enough, the assumption is, well, you've been in the company for 10 years. Oh gosh, we got to move you up. But the truth is, moving you up may be a detriment to you, and it may be a detriment to the company.
That person may bring less value now because of the fact that they're not bringing that value that they want in their job.
Okay, so he's saying that it's a value issue, is what you're saying. They're not bringing the same level of value. And I understand that. They take me and what I'm doing right now as vice president. My job is to assist the president in the work that he does. I'm not a good baby kisser. I'm not a good fundraiser. But I get that all the time. You've been a VP for how long? Well, when are you going to be president? The truth is, now, maybe personally, I can wrap my arms around that task, but I am much happier doing what I do. But what we don't allow people to do is to celebrate that. People are happier doing what they're doing. The problem is, if they want to be successful, the way the world defines it, and if they want to be remunerated or paid at a level that allows them to capture the American dream, they have to actually give up what they're good at to do something else. That make sense? That's why you should be, because you can own your own life. If you're in a solo position, yeah, that might be true. It depends on what you go. And I know people are that. We call, I've used this term before, people who are spark plugs. They come into an organization, they do their thing, and when the organization matures to a point, they leave because they know that they're going to be pushed to take another position, and they don't want that. So they just move themselves to the next place that needs me. That's a way of understanding why it's so important for me, so that you understand your personality style, you understand your nature, your passion, your goals, because that's how you get off track. You follow what people tell you to do because, oh, you should go to the next level, and you're realizing, I guess I have to. I mean, I've been in PBL, that's our business club here on campus. I've been in PBL since I was a freshman. I'm the only senior. I have to take presidency. Do us all a favor. Recognize your own inability and say no. Because that's what happens. I've been here the longest. I'm the only person that's the oldest. I have to take primary leadership. Once we begin thinking that way, we begin to degrade the ability of our organizations to be successful. Because we're not recognizing my own abilities and inabilities. That's why we get back to things like, how do I know if my friends are helping me or not? How do I know my own personality style? How do I know my own goals and my own passions? You got to know these things so you can plug yourself in the right spot. So, that brings up the issue of followership then. So how did that transfer over to followership? Well, in essence, it began to illustrate for me that there is a different level, because the big push was lead. Lead. Get to leadership conferences. Go become a leader. And this is true from the church level to the business level to just cultural. Lead. You got to be a leader. Many of you took this class simply because you thought, gosh, I want to be better, so I need to be a leader. Right? The truth is maybe the other way around. Actually, I tell people a lot of times that lead less, follow more, and you'll lead better. Great little quote. Probably write that down somewhere. Okay? Lead less, follow more, lead better. That there is a side to us. Look, think about your day. I mean, just think about your day. Do you spend more time leading or following? Most of us, if we're typical, spend our day following, meaning that we're responding to the requests or the demands of other people. Right? Very little bit is in leadership where we're giving requests and demands to other people for them to respond to. But yet, when we begin to look at this, if that's where most of my day is spent, that's the area where we're least training people. In the church, I think that's a major problem in the church. All we hear in the church is we need leaders, we need leaders, we need leaders. We've heard that in business. We need leaders, we need leaders, we need leaders. Well, Lord have mercy. We have invested billions of dollars in training leaders. It ain't getting any better. At some point, you got to ask your question, maybe we're paying attention to the wrong issue. Does that make sense? But again, culturally, it's leadership. Now, so let me back up again and kind of come at this different direction. One of the key issues that we have to deal with is the cultural concept of follow. I mean, think about this. You come up to somebody and you say, "What are you?" And you say, "I'm a leader." What's the emotive, effective reaction? You raised your eyebrows. What were you thinking?
If they're gonna define themselves what they got after that idea.
Oh, yeah, sure. So you're doubtful. Well, I appreciate that. That's good. Yeah, because it's kind of egotistical. Yeah. But in the sense that maybe you see it, that they're the leader or something like that. What's your assumption about the person? If they're named a leader. They're more mature. They're smarter. Keep going. Higher on the ladder. Their priorities are in order. Have a lot of drive. They're better. They're more experienced. What'd somebody say? Okay, more experienced. They know what they're doing. Now, twist that around. I'm a follower. I'm not mature. I can't think for myself. What's that? Yeah, it is a good one. Yeah. What else? I'm a follower. What does that mean? I'm a follower. I'm incapable, not as good, submissive, weak. You're not as high on the ladder. You're holding the ladder. Okay. Can't think for yourself. You hear what we're saying? Embedded in our language. Now you're back to semantics again. Embedded in our language. And don't ever tell me that culture and language don't go key into with one another. To even assume that by and large, researchers like myself who are dealing with followership, that's our biggest hurdle. That's one of the biggest reasons why followership really has not taken hold in leadership philosophy, because of the word. And there are actually followership theorists who are trying to create a different word, because it's the word that's the problem. Because once you say follower, I'm a follower, and I'm proud to be a follower, you'll look like an idiot.
We call it sidekicks.
Sidekicks? Yeah. Well, I'll get to that in just a minute. Okay. What's that? A princess. Oh, apprentice. I would say, la, 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 la. Yeah, apprentice. Yeah. See what I'm saying? So I know that as we sit and talk about this, even as you guys begin to think about it, one of the things you're going to have to wrestle with is the very concept of what it means to be a follower. Because, and think about it from a theological standpoint, you kind of got to think about what was Jesus saying himself. Come follow me. So was he just looking for idiots who would blindly do whatever he told them to? Is that what the whole entire gospel is based on? 12 dummies who blindly followed after some self-deluded individual who he knew that they were not capable of critical thinking and they couldn't make a choice on their own, that they were not capable of independent behavior, that he could just shape them and mold them into what he wants to be, so that this movement he created would be a worldwide movement and tons of people would be pouring their money and thoughts into Christianity, but it had no value? Okay, so he saw people that had strengths that needed to be sharpened. See, but again, that means you would have to redefine what you meant by follower. Does that make sense? I don't know if we'll get it to today, but one of the lectures coming up will actually talk about the etymology of the word follow as it's used, especially in Scripture, to show you how that relationship is there. But again, you have to You've got to, because it's going to be a big question for you when you get done with this series or this class, is can you stand up proudly and say, I'm a follower? And I can be proud of that fact. Or you're always going to have to carry that weight is, I'm a follower. It's a secret though. Because if I say it out loud, people will think I'm an idiot. Does that make sense? It also makes an assumption about the role of the leader. Because think about all the things you just said about a leader. I know a lot of leaders that are kind of... because they're positional. They didn't get to be a leader because they actually are capable to be a leader. They got there because of whatever reason. Let me pull out for you real quick. It was a quote, and I forget... Charles Pellegrino, I think it was in his book. He actually writes on the Titanic of all things. And I was reading this book on the Titanic, and he says this quote, and I think it's a great quote. I want to take a moment and discuss it. He says, "We get inadequate leaders because the people in leadership are usually the people who desperately want and ruthlessly compete for those positions. So the people at the top are not necessarily good leaders, that I add that, but are just good competitors." And now you have to ask yourself the question, does being a good competitor, is that synonymous with being a good leader? In our culture today, yes. And this is where we get back to situational. Because the situation of our culture right now, and our government, and our political system, our economic system, the people who are leaders are competitors. And competitors are the people that are winning. So therefore, we assume synonymously that competitors are good leaders. But again, you hear that. We get inadequate leaders because the people who are in leadership desperately want and ruthlessly compete for that position. Why? For recognition. Say that out loud again. What do you mean by that? Babies cry for, men die for. Recognition. Oh, okay, I got you. Yeah. That's good. Babies cry for recognition, men die for recognition. Or at least they beat other people up, lie, cheat, and steal, do anything they can to get to the position of recognition. I don't know how many would actually die for it. They want to still be alive to get it. We hear that? I mean, that's a key issue. Now, he goes on to say at the bottom, or later in the chapter, he says, perhaps the most important question facing our civilization is not how inadequate leaders become inadequate leaders, but what characteristics of human nature cause us to so consistently choose the most inadequate among us and elevate them to positions where they can inflict the greatest harm. Now, this gets back to me, a followership question. This is not a leadership question. And you hear what he's saying in here. It's not how inadequate leaders become inadequate leaders. It's not necessarily the fault of the leader. It's how do we, as the rest of culture, celebrate that person as a leader? Why do we vote them as a leader? Why do we allow them to lead? It is followers who control the face of success. It's followers who control the outcomes. The problem is in American culture, especially our political culture, we think that we sit back and just are supposed to take it all. We're consumers. Just feed me. Church, feed me. Politics, feed me. Economics, feed me. You don't like something? Vote. Not just with your votes in a ballot box, but vote by your actions. We are the followers. Again, most of us live life as followers. And you can't, once you become a leader, even if you do, you don't cease to be a follower. We're still part of this chaotic community. So again, it's not how inadequate leaders become inadequate leaders. It's that we celebrate these people and we make them our leaders, and so therefore we redefine leadership. We write about it in books. And what are the aspects? I mean, you guys are reading a leadership book right now. And you espouse to be that kind of leader. But that's not what we celebrate in our society. Does that make sense? And so we have to ask ourselves that question. Why ultimately are we allowing these kinds of things to happen? Why do we elevate these people into key leadership positions? Why do we celebrate them as leaders? Why do we follow them? And I'm getting a little bit into worldview here. Well, because I need the paycheck. Okay, so then we get back to our values. What are you willing to sell about yourself in order to get the other things you want? And that means that what you're willing to sell is not as valued as much as what it is that you're willing to buy. And that's a dangerous value issue. Does that make sense? Because you guys, we can't control the face of whether it's your business, your school, whether it's a culture, a town, a community, a world. We're the ones that make those decisions. I forget the guy's name. Jonathan, I think it's Schlint or something like that. He's done some research and he quotes, and I'll have to get the original research to show you. But he talks about these two numbers, 80% and 20%. That somehow they were able to calculate the fact that 80% of the success or the input that makes an organization successful comes from followers. Only 20% of the success of any organization is actually reflective of the work of the leader. Now you could say, oh, but the leader affects the followers. There's some truth to that, but it's backwards. Because the followers really should be defining that, and if 80%, if that's true, look what you can change. But again, it has to go back to this value system issue. It comes back to the questions of what are you willing to give up or not give up. Look, it's a simple thing. You don't like something in the political structure? You don't like the way something is priced or the way they're controlling it? Stop buying it. Economics controls a lot. So you vote with your pocketbooks. Here's the point. Most of us don't want to give that up. So we sell ourselves out. We sell our own what's leadership? What's leadership? Influence. We sell out our own influence for ease. Does that make sense? It's easier. It's easier for me to sit back and do nothing because I get fed, I get taken care of, I'm fine, I get to watch my TV, I get to have my shows, so I sell my influence by just abdicating it. I just get rid of it. Now, what concerns me more about this relationship, I was on the web here recently, and the exact numbers, I'll put it in print if I put some of this to paper. But books on Amazon, just books. I think there was something close to, I didn't get the exact number, but 137,000 books on leadership. 137 books. Now, I didn't go through to see any repeats and so on, so there could be some repeats and so on, but 137,000 books. When I did the same question with this issue of followership, I found 317. So of the books on, that's actually wrong. Of the books on leadership and followership, 0.2% are written to assist the people who have 80% of the influence over the success of an organization. Now you could say, well, that's because leadership is the better choice. By training people in leadership, and this is really the crux of what followership is all about, by training people in leadership, they become better followers. But hear me very clearly. When you begin to train someone for leadership, you put in them the thirst for leadership. And what happens is they use followership as a way to get to leadership. That creates bad leaders. Does that make sense? It's the same issue that I have with servant leadership. Now, we put the two together because a lot of people say there's no difference between followership and servant leadership. But I have a real problem with servant leadership is a great concept. Great concept. I don't have a problem with it. But when you look at it as synonymous with this idea of fellowship, what you're telling people is, hey, dude, you want to be a great leader? Be a servant. But did you hear what I just said? It's not be a servant, because there's value in being a servant. If you want to be a leader, you need to be a servant. And people go back to the Gospels, if you want to be first, you have to be last, so go be last. Well, if your intention is to be last so you can be first, you're going to be last. Because your motivation's screwed up. If you're serving people in your organization because you want them to respect you more so that you can influence them, you're not serving them. You're self-serving. You may do some good along the way, but you're still self-serving. That's where I get back to lead less, follow more, lead better. Because the outcome of good followership is good leadership. To use followership or use service as a way to increase my leadership potential is backward. That's why I think ultimately Jesus didn't ask people, come follow me and I will show you how to lead the world. Because that moment is, I'm thinking, I'm here to lead the world. I think with Peter and so on, they just came to follow this guy. And through the following of that guy, when that guy disappeared, I have everything I need to successfully do what needs to be done. And then is the realization of my positional power that's already based on my knowledge of followership. That makes sense? So it's a long introduction to get into where we'll go as we go forward these lectures on what is followership, defining it, how to incorporate it, and so on. So, all right. Great job. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you coming out.